Good afternoon. My name is David Weinreich, and I'm here to give a presentation on app-based on-demand transportation used as public transit in the state of Texas. First, we start with the cost of transfers. Transfers can discourage ridership, reducing the utility of public transportation by about 25% for a normal transfer, or up to 55% for transfers between modes, sometimes requiring riders to wait outside to pay for more than one fare, and sometimes schedules don't coordinate. So transfers, they increase the cost of riding transportation for the rider, discouraging ridership. But we also know that we can manage this cost with certain technologies like smart cards, app-based fare payment systems, shared transfer facilities, sometimes more than one transit service sharing the same facility, coordinated scheduling between vehicles. Shared maintenance facilities are another way that different transit agencies can facilitate coordination among routes. Shared information across agencies, for example, on which routes have high ridership and which riders are going where, can help transit agencies manage their routes so that they are in sync with each other. And various institutional solutions, which we'll talk about more later. And that's all for fixed route transit. We also know that governance of transit agencies can have a large impact on where transit goes. For example, this map of the Dallas area rapid transit system in Texas shows the green areas are areas that are in the transit agency. The red areas are jurisdictions that voted back in 1983 to not join the transit agency because of high cost, or they didn't want public transit. And then the checkered areas are areas that joined but later voted on whether to leave the agency. And you can see that all of the purple lines with the red dots, those are all stations. All the purple lines that are served by the agency are the areas that joined the agency back in 1983. So the boundaries of transit agencies can have a high impact on which areas are actually served. You can see this map here from the Dallas metro area, Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, shows the areas that are served by transit agencies. All the white areas are areas that are not served by any agency at all. There are lots of holes in the system. And then areas that are a little bit darker have more than one agency. Some of the counties like Parker County and Denton on the outskirts of the region, those are served by rural transit agencies. But in the inner part of the region, somewhere around 40% of the people in the area are not even covered by a transit agency. One of the, let's see, one of the ways that we can overcome this type of governance fragmentation is horizontally through cross-jurisdictional coordination among agencies. We can there is past literature that talks about how networks can overcome this, and how integration of different agencies can improve coordination. Another way that we can overcome transfers is through planning at higher levels of government. That just planning at the county level, the regional level, the state level, can help ensure that there aren't these service gaps, and that areas that have more than one transit agency in the region, that those agencies coordinate. The question is, how does this literature on governance structure translate into on-demand public transit? We also know that there is some literature, though not very much, that is on-demand transportation. This is probably the best example here, that showing different service models of on-demand public transit. There hasn't really been a lot of literature looking at the governance of public transit, or of on-demand public transit, but there is some that looks at different service models. For example, using on-demand services to cover a single route, maybe stopping at different places along the route depending on demand, sometimes deviating from that route to serve people near the main line, sometimes acting as the fifth one down, acting as a feeder service to serve people within a certain area and then bringing them to a station. So there are certain service models that have looked at on-demand public transit. This study, we looked at how app-based on-demand services have been used as public transit in the state of Texas. We don't really know that, or we didn't know that before this study. We also looked at how government-planned app-based on-demand transit services serve areas outside of their formal jurisdictional boundaries, and what app-based on-demand providers have done to overcome jurisdictional fragmentation and better coordinate across transit agencies, and also what can they do. First, we started with a survey of municipalities across the state of Texas. We looked at cities, counties, MPOs, and transit providers. We sent an extensive survey to staff members working at these transit agencies, cities, municipalities, MPOs, and asked a number of questions about the provision of app-based on-demand services in their area and coordination across jurisdictions. We sent these surveys to the top 10, any governments within the top 10 metro areas in Texas. So we have a statewide set of data here. Most cases we found were most cases, you'll see the last line there, were paratransit services, rural or suburban, but there were very few urban services. And even in certain urban areas that we're looking at providing an app-based on-demand service like Dallas, most of those were in the low density parts of the city. Also, we found from this data that most were planning or were using the service, or if they were planning it, they were planning something that was a supplement rather than a replacement, although it was almost evenly divided. The purpose of the app demand services, you can also see them broken down by agency in this table here. Some of the services that we found also listed service by service. You can see a lot of them in Denton County, and then there were some in Austin, Arlington, Dallas, and the last one is Trinity Metro, which is in Fort Worth. This is a summary table of the services showing the different funding sources that supported them. You can see there was one that was funded by a sandbox grant that was in the DART service area. There was also one that was supported by 5307 matching funds. That was in Arlington. And then there was a number that were supported just out of the transit agency's general fund or other public funds. Also, you can see the operations section that there was one that was contracted, one that was public, and also a number that were provided by private providers. And then finally, we looked at the integration techniques that were used by the different services, and this is a summary table of the different techniques, and I'll go into those in much more detail in a second. But you can see just as a summary, we looked at infrastructure techniques, scheduling, fare coordination, information sharing, special events, which none of them were coordinating, and integration of apps across services. Looking at just a few examples here, the Arlington service. This is one case example that we went into more depth and we interviewed people, and we started to find that when we went into more depth, actually there were cases where the survey, first of all, the data changed over the year, so we had to get a lot of that information from just interviews, and then some services started to be proposed during that year time span that we did the study that weren't proposed at the beginning, and then also we found that there were some cases where the information that we got from the survey was contradicted by some of the interviews. So in this study, we rely mostly on the interviews for our information rather than the survey. For an example of a contradiction was public officials saying that they wanted to use the service mostly to supplement existing public transit, but then they wanted, but then they wanted to replace it, things like that. So this is looking at the Arlington case. In Arlington, there was previously no public transit service, but what they offered to do here was use city funds to subsidize VIA, which offers a $3 flat rate to take their shared service around town. It's kind of like an Uber pool, except it can take you from point to point within the city of Arlington, and it can also take you to the Centerport station as a feeder service to the Trinity Rail Express commuter train. It operates from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. There are currently no monetary incentives to transfer between this service and the commuter train because you have to pay a full fare for both. And there's also minimal advertising and no signage at key transfer points. At the Dallas area rapid transit system, they're also providing a feeder service. We went into depth on this service as well, and they're providing services in each of the areas of this map that are a color other than blue. It's hard to point it here on the webinar, but the areas that are green and purple and pinkish are areas that are served by this on-demand public transit service that is offered by DART through a contract with a private provider. So looking at some of our findings, we found a number of areas where physical infrastructure could be used as a tool to coordinate between the on-demand app-based services and fixed route transit. This shows two side-by-side photos. On the left is from the transfer between the VIA service in Arlington and the Trinity Rail Express train. You can see that there are no signs telling you that the service exists, telling you how to download the app. There's also no permanent bay for the vehicle to park into. That's just a parking lot. It doesn't actually have a set place where the vehicle stops. And the city wants it that way. They have not really worked closely with the Trinity Rail Express to try to develop the station to support the service. They don't want any permanent infrastructure. On the right shows the DART system where they where they transfer with the light rail, and there are bays for the buses to stop. There is a sign telling riders that this is how to download the app. This is the hours that it operates. There's even a few shelters that riders can stop at. And I should say that one of the difference between these two is the governance of them, which I'll talk about a little more in a second. But the one on the left is a transfer between two different agencies. So there's not really an incentive for them to coordinate as much. And on the right is a transfer between one DART service and another DART service. So there's definitely an incentive for more coordination on the right. Scheduling and coordination is another element that is important in service integration. The service in Arlington, it stops running 1 minute before one of the trains arrives in the transfer between the train and the VIA service. That probably shouldn't happen. If they have better coordination between the two agencies, that wouldn't be a factor. So even though the app-based on-demand services don't have a fixed schedule, they do have a set service hours. So it is important to look at that when planning the service. And it probably could be even better, possibly having timed transfers, having coordinated routing. For example, if you're taking the service to the app-based service to get to the train, and the service sometimes takes 5 minutes to come, sometimes takes 30 minutes to come. It's hard to predict when to call the vehicle so that you can arrive at the train on time, or conversely, so that you don't end up spending an hour waiting for the train. So this is especially an issue in situations where you don't have very frequent fixed route service that you're trying to feed into. In the DART case, they do have better coordination, but also the light rail is running every 15 minutes, so it's not as much of a problem. So there are ways to overcome this, like being able to call the vehicle to come at a specific time, that have not been implemented yet, but conceivably could be. Fare coordination is another factor that we found was lacking in the Arlington and Trinity Rail Express transfer, but was present in DART. And for example, if you take the Arlington service, you are going to pay $3 for that service, plus you're going to pay the full fare for the Trinity Rail Express. There is no transfer discount. Whereas if you take the DART service, especially if you have a DART pass, then you're going to pay one fare. And that's facilitated by the fact that DART is the same agency running both the app-based service and the fixed route, but in Arlington's case, two different agencies. So definitely, if you talk to riders, they will tell you that the fare is an important deterrent to riding the service. So this is something that we do need to think about. Information sharing is another important factor. In our interviews, we did not find any evidence of information sharing across agencies. For example, if a lot of riders are going to be taking the Trinity Rail Express, maybe Arlington could have more vans ready to go, waiting for those riders to arrive. If the two agencies were sharing information, that's something that we did not see evidence of in our research, but could be done to improve our connections. We also didn't see any evidence of planning for special events. Actually, in the Arlington case, some of our interviewees told us that they did not want the service to go after 9 p.m. so that they wouldn't have to serve as many special events. Keep in mind that for app-based services, the provider is there is no incentive to provide service for more people like there is for buses, right? If you're providing for a fixed route bus, more people get on the bus, your cost per rider goes down. But if you are providing on-demand service, every new rider is costing you more. So that's an inherent disincentive to provide service for large special events. But if we want this to be a public transit service and we want to provide for our communities, definitely we want to think about special event planning. App-based services also have a higher an additional factor that we need to think about of coordination, the apps themselves. In some cases, like in Denton, we found 5 different apps present at the same time in the same city for different services. It would definitely help to have a single app that could provide services across a region. There is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's the GoLink app that DART is developing with a sandbox grant, but other services have to pay to use that app. So there needs to be more incentives in place to share apps across agencies. So moving forward, first of all, we shouldn't assume that app-based on-demand services will automatically be good feeders into fixed route service. A lot of that depends on the way that we set them up, the way we manage them, the fare structure, the ease of transferring, the scheduling, the integration of the infrastructure itself and the apps. Those are all things that can make it, that can degrade the service's ability to be a good transfer into existing fixed route services. Some permanence is good. Sheltered waiting areas, for example, signage. The people that we interviewed seemed to want the app-based service to be able to move constantly to different pickup areas. Maybe they didn't want to make a commitment to always provide service to a single place, but then you have areas like the transfer to the fixed route service. That transfer is always going to happen at the same place. So we might as well have boarding areas and shelters and signage. financial disincentives for high levels of service in dense areas, especially, are something that we do need to think about with app-based on-demand services if they're going to be playing the public transit role. There is a disincentive for agencies to provide service for more people, especially in high-density areas. So that's something that we need to either budget enough money to provide the level of service that we want, or we need to admit that this service is not going to provide for everyone. Funding at higher levels of government can help with some of these issues. For example, the Sandbox grant is providing service across the country to 11 different areas. They could be requiring better coordination. And also the Sandbox grant does make the assumption that most of the services that they're providing will be feeder services. So they need to think, well, if it is going to be a feeder service, but it's crossing from one agency to another, what are they going to do to facilitate that coordination in things like fares and information sharing and apps, et cetera. And coordination across agencies can be done through things like MOUs, multi-jurisdictional funding, informal agreements, et cetera. The same things that we know we can use for fixed route service. We need to have some of that coordination happening for on-demand services. So that's all for now, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Let's see, the first question is, let's see, what's Arlington's normal adult fare for fixed route? Arlington doesn't have a fixed route service. They had one route that went from the University of Texas, Arlington, to the train, to the Trinity Rail Express. They discontinued, that route was done through a contract with DART. They discontinued the route right before they implemented the on-demand service, but that route's fare, if I remember correctly, was about $2. So the app-based on-demand service replaced it with a $3 fare, but allowed you to more flexibility to take it. Let's see, the next question. Can they take loop? I'm not sure what this means. Can they take loop on and off for this flat fee? I don't know what that means. Okay, next. Oh, loop Q referred to Arlington loop P on your slide. Let's see. I don't know what the question means by loop. Okay, I'm going to have to go on to the next one. Okay, could someone repeat what 3 and 4 were? 3 and 4? Okay, so 3 was fare. That's coordination of the fares between the app-based on-demand service and the fixed route service. So a lot of times, if you think in an analogous way, how do you transfer from one fixed route service to another? A lot of agencies will have a transfer discount so that you don't end up paying 2 fares. And even in cases where you transfer from one agency to another, a lot of times they will have an agreement between the 2 agencies so that riders can pay a reduced transfer fee between the two. So for fixed route services, we have that system in place. For app-based on-demand services, we haven't really thought about that so far. And I think a lot of that's because the app-based on-demand services are in the pilot stage in many cases. But by the same token, a lot of these services are funded through federal sandbox money, and sandbox grant money. And most of the sandbox grants, I went through the sandbox grants, and the majority of them talk about their service as a feeder to public transit, to fixed route public transit service. So they're definitely thinking about them as a feeder service. The sandbox program at the FTA ought to be thinking about how to facilitate that or require that. I looked up the numbers. 7 out of 11 sandbox grants talk about their service as a feeder service, as a first last mile to public transit. So if they're thinking about it that way, then the sandbox program ought to be thinking about how to facilitate that goal. Let's see, next one. Can you clarify the financial disincentives on the previous slide? Oh, I'm sorry, for the previous questionnaire, I didn't answer the second part. What was number 4? Information sharing across agencies. Next one, can you clarify the financial disincentives on the previous slide? I'm not sure which slide they're, previous from what? Okay, if that person can clarify that, I'll answer the question. Next one, do any of the agencies work with the feds on the protocols for, I don't know what that acronym stands for, I'm sorry, to support mode changes? Let's see, to support mode, I think by mode changes, they mean changes from fixed route to public, or to app-based on demand. I'm not sure what, that question's a little unclear. Let's see, okay, previous slide referred to bullet 3 on the moving forward. Oh, okay, thank you. Let's see, bullet 3 on the moving forward slide. Financial disincentives for high levels of service in dense areas. Okay, well, in our interviews, we found the staff members from one of the agencies, or actually several of the agencies, were talking about the high cost of providing for every rider. So if we're going to make app-based on demand a serious form of public transportation, we do have to accept the fact that that for every rider, it's going to be a higher cost. So there is a financial disincentive for providing this, for using app-based on-demand service as a form of public transit, especially in dense urban areas. So I think when we're talking about app-based on-demand services, we should recognize that maybe they're best for suburban areas where the demand is low, or where the cost of providing fixed route service is high with little benefit. Very circuitous routes in many suburban cases. So in those cases, maybe app-based on demand provides a useful alternative. But in dense urban areas, the cost might just be too high for a transit agency to replace its fixed route service. So that's what I'm trying to say there. Integrated demand transit operations. Okay. Oh, to communicate when a bus is running late. Oh, I see. Okay. Do any of the agencies work with the feds on the protocols for mode changes? We didn't find any examples of the agencies working with each other on communicating to each other anything really, but this hopefully that changes. But right now we did not find any form of communication across agencies about the other agencies' demand, and certainly not dynamic communications. In a lot of cases, the information, one of the challenges was that the information is held by private contractors like Via or Uber, that they were contracting with to provide the service. So even the transit agency doesn't know how much demand there is. Or maybe they know that somebody requested the service, but as soon as the private provider like Uber starts providing the service, it drops off the transit agency's map, so to speak, off their radar. So they no longer know if somebody actually got on. So that's a real problem if a lot of these services are provided by private contractors. And certainly that wasn't a requirement for getting sandbox money. I don't think. Maybe I'd have to look that up though. Let's see, next question. Please explain why there isn't an incentive for serving high density areas. Doesn't provider get funded by the trip? Well, no. So the services are heavily subsidized. So that $3 that people pay is much less than the cost. Even Uber and Lyft are heavily subsidized by venture capital money. The money, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's somewhere around half the cost is subsidized. So maybe somebody can provide an exact figure actually, but so no, none of these services are paying for themselves, and the transit agencies are thinking about how much are they paying per ride to subsidize. Just like with public transit, they're thinking that too. None of the public transit, or very few public transit services, pay for themselves. But in this case, the gap is a lot bigger. They are paying a significant amount of money per rider. Very interesting presentation when you stated that app-based on-demand services may not be good feeders into fixed route transit. Is that the case with the DART on-demand services? Are those services attracting riders who otherwise may be using taxi or rideshare? Well, I don't mean to say that they're never good feeders into public transit. It depends on the circumstance. Now in DART, the service, the on-demand service, the feeder, is the same agency as the fixed route service. So they're able to coordinate better. I don't know exactly whether they've had a lot of ridership on it, because the service was just beginning when we did the project. So we don't have numbers yet on how many people actually rode it. So this project focused on the amount of coordination between the agencies, their ability to provide integrating elements that can overcome fragmentation. So in DART's case, they were able to do that much better because they were both by the same agency. But it remains to be seen how the ridership plays out. Let's see, next question. My question is similar to James Devlin's. Let's see, should levels of ridership, I think this is a typo here, but levels of ridership are generated on the DART app-based, what levels of ridership, I think they meant to say, are generated on the DART app-based on-demand service. Yeah, so DART didn't have those numbers yet when we did the project. Maybe now they might. Let's see, in Santa Clara County, the transit agency is interested in or considering providing app-based MOD, mobility on demand service for very low performing routes. Do you find evidence of a similar dynamic? Well, in the cases in Texas, we did find that most of them, or a high percentage of them, were in low density areas. I can't say whether the route is low performing, because in places like Dart, they were replacing previously existing on-demand service. So in several of those areas, there weren't routes, fixed routes in place. And in Arlington's case, I would say that's probably true, but I'd have to look at the numbers. But they are probably most conducive for cases where the routes are not performing well, or you have low density. Just because to provide a fixed route in low density areas, a lot of times it has to go from one side of the city to another, very circuitous, a lot of times wiggling its way across the city, just to be able to provide coverage, but not necessarily providing fast accessibility. So on-demand does have the potential to do that, but again, it's expensive, and you're going to have to subsidize it a lot. So you probably have to make the cost benefit calculation. Let's see. Last one is what were the goals of this research, and are there recommendations of what to do differently going forward to improve these deficiencies? Well, this research wanted to find, first of all, how much were app-based on-demand services even being used as public transit. It wanted to identify this trend and see the extent to which this was happening in an entire U.S. state. So we were able to do that. We were able to find out how much this was happening, where it was happening, find out that a lot of these were in suburban or low density areas, and find out some of the challenges that they were running into. And then second of all, I wanted to identify the ability to overcome fragmentation of services. We knew that fragmentation is a challenge for fixed route services. Some cases like the Bay Area, for example, you have 26 transit agencies in the same area. So fragmentation is definitely a challenge. And also service gaps are a challenge. So because we knew that in Dallas metro area that over 40% of the people don't live in an area served by public transit, and many jobs as well. So we wanted to see how well app-based on-demand services were doing in all of those things. I think that's the. Oh, and then they asked what were some of the recommendations to improve deficiencies moving forward. So I would go to the last page here, the moving forward page, and this is just a general list of recommendations. But I would say to go through each of the categories of integration and provide and try to remedy that category for app-based on-demand services. So provide better physical infrastructure, provide reduced fares for riders transferring from one to another, have better information sharing, better apps that maybe a single app for the whole area. So each of those is something that transit agencies can do. A lot of times they will need to do that through some kind of a governance structure, like a memorandum of understanding, or some kind of a contract between agencies, or just planning it at a higher level of government, like the state or the region or the MPO. So those are some examples. And then the sandbox program needs to incorporate a lot of these findings into its requirements for the next round of grants, if they decide to do that. Okay, no more questions. Well, thank you very much.